morning when I got an email from Dr. Marija Runic, and she was thinking of applying for a Fulbright to come to Western, and thus began an important collaboration and friendship. So I'm forever grateful that she sought us out in our little corner of the world. She received her PhD in linguistics in 2014 from the University of Padua in Italy, and is now professor of Italian linguistics at the University of Banja Luka in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So some of you, this has been a really enriching and rewarding experience, not only for me, but for our colleagues and our and some of our students. So some of there's some students here who are in the fall Ling 402 languages of the Balkans, and what a unique opportunity those students have. So I won't. Right. I won't take any more time. I'm really excited to hear sort of the culmination of a lot of work that Marija's been working on. So.
Thank you for coming once again. And I would like to start with telling you how I ended up here. So I'm a formal linguist. What I do, I study the structure of languages and the situation of contact when speakers speak two languages for a very long time. And by doing that, I actually became fascinated with everything that comes from speakers, any kind of production. And only by doing linguistics, I got rid of some very bad doctrines I was exposed to through all my schoolings, that language of some people is better than, and some speakers are better than others. So linguistics really helped me appreciate everything that is in language. And when I got back home with this newly acquired consciousness, I realized that this is not the case for most people around. And I became more active in spreading knowledge about languages. I exposed myself to a lot of media. I mean, I felt that was my duty. And I also started thinking about where this all come from, because it's so widely acknowledged and accepted in the society, so it must be institutional. And I started thinking about education. I wrote my first project, linguistics for high schools. At that time, I didn't know about Kristen and the M, nothing. And I started writing about language discrimination without actually knowing the literature. Hello. And it was in 2017, I saw this call for a conference in Tallinn, Theoretical Linguistics in Secondary Education. And in the call for papers, all the references pointed to Dana and Lobec's work, and this is how I found out about them, about their amazing work they've been doing to promote linguistic literacy in the United States, but also elsewhere, because I found out about that. And at the conference, I met two teachers from the United States. It was such an inspiring and amazing discussion that helped me really kind of propose a project. I wrote to Kristen, she replied like after 5 minutes with her passion, enthusiasm, and encouragement, and this is how I'm here. Probably doing something that I think it's quite important for my society back home, but also globally. Okay, so this is the triangle I've been moving around in my career. Well, the idea is that, linguistics teach us thinking critically, assessing language, accepting, creating hypotheses, testing them, providing evidence. And by doing so, we kind of accept everything that comes from language. And language is about diversity, about variation. This is how we can use linguistics to teach variation. And finally, teaching variation is teaching, appreciating others and the way they are. So it's about also teaching tolerance. That is so much needed in every society. Okay, so my project is framed as an alarm clock. There is a presupposition that we really need linguistics in education. It is a project that lies at the intersection of linguistics and education. It is an interdisciplinary project. As for linguistics, I was thinking about what could be a contribution, and I think it's, by doing this, we can help linguistics understand what linguistic cultures worldwide are and educational settings are. And by linguistic culture, I mean a totality of beliefs, ideas, myths, prejudices about language that speakers have as part of their cultural baggage when they learn new language. And as for education, I believe that linguistics is a very powerful tool for creating an education system that is built on solidarity, equity, and critical thinking. The project is conducted in Bosnia and Herzegovina, my home country, and US. And the idea is to be able to build on the best practices for the integration of linguistics in the US and implement them back home. And by doing that, I was really had to compare the two contexts and found some striking parallels, also thanks to my students who were sitting in my course, but I won't be able to talk about this in this presentation, maybe sometime in the future. Okay, these are like many questions that I'm asking myself, and this is a crowdsourcing enterprise, so if you can contribute, I'm really willing to hear your suggestions, not only today, but also during my stay here and through email, and hopefully in the future. This is the roadmap, all roads lead to Rome. And I will be talking mostly about, mostly about Bosnia and Herzegovina socio-political context and the socio-linguistic situation that is a result of that context. Then we'll look a little bit into linguistics and education back home, a little bit about my study and preliminary results, because there's so much material I couldn't actually analyze all of them. I have almost 15 hours of recordings, and the last focus groups I did was the day before I arrived here. And we will kind of look together into some ideas for the future. Okay, so Bosnia and Herzegovina is a small country in the Western Balkans, one of the three European peninsula. It's been independent since 1992. And it comes out of the disintegration of Yugoslavia alongside other five, Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, Macedonia, Montenegro, or six, and Kosovo is still disputed. And throughout the presentation you'll see a lot of pictures of my country, landscapes and cities, and feel free to ask me more about these after the presentation. So Bosnia and Herzegovina has three major ethnic groups, Bosniaks or Muslims, Serbs or Orthodox Christians, and Croats or Catholic Christians. There are three official languages, Bosnian, Serbian, and Croatian, and two script, Latin and Cyrillic script. I'm not mentioning minorities. So you may wonder why I would put religious affiliation in a secular country, because traditionally, historically, religion is the only difference between these three ethnic groups. They speak the same language, they're South Slavic, but they have different religion. And Bosnia is known worldwide for a very troubled history. I mean, for example, if you look like Muslim population is the only indigenous population, Muslim population in Europe, it's because of more than 400 years of Ottoman rule. And then this is where the First World War started in the capital of Bosnia, Sarajevo, where Franz Ferdinand was shot. Second World War was horrible, with a lot of bad battles, a lot of dead people. And of course, probably the most known event from the recent history is the Civil War from the 90s. The country is still recovering from the war, it's ethnically divided, and it is under the strong international supervision. So this divide, ethnic divide, is not only political, administrative, but it's also ideological and in some cases psychological. So it's really like something that is important when considering Bosnia and Herzegovina society. Okay, so this is the ethnic makeup before the war. This was in 1991 and after the war. Okay, these demographics, so green, various shades of green represent Muslim Bosnian population, red Serbian, and blue Croat. So these tectonic demographic changes, as you can imagine, were accompanied by ethnic cleansing, a lot of dead people, like in little more than 3 years, more than 100,000 dead people. If you compare to Lebanese conflict in 15 years, the same number of people. More than 2 million people, half of the population was displaced. Genocide of Srebrenica, in 3 days, 8,000 people were killed. Between 20 and 30,000 women were raped, exposed to sexual violence. I'm not talking about men because research has only been done since recently. And there is no single person in Bosnia and Herzegovina that is not affected by war in one way or another, including myself. I'm a refugee. I lived in Bosnia during the war, and I come from an interethnic marriage. My mother is Croat, my father is Serbian. This is the worst case scenario in a civil war. So sometimes, and this is, I mean, mass destruction everywhere. So, this is the event that kind of, when the new, post-Dayton Bosnia was created after the Dayton Peace Accords, these, nice people, some of them are rich, some of them are war criminals. Bosnia and Herzegovina of today is the legacy of the vision of these people. And it's a divided country into two, basically, three administrative units. Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina in pale blue, 51% of the territory inhabited predominantly by Bosniaks and Croats. Republika Srpska, where I live, pale pink, inhabited predominantly by Serbs, and Brčko district, which is a self-governing administrative unit. It was created upon arbitration. And as you can imagine, this is a very dysfunctional state in a permanent state of deadlock over many issues, let alone language, which is the principal marker of identity. And it has cost and inefficient administration, and ethno-national affiliation is kind of supreme interest and right. And this is why ethno-national political and intellectual elites thrive in this system. And this is why after 25 years after the war, we still have ethno-national issues dominate political and ideological arena. So the system is problem. Okay, so this functionality of the state can be best shown in the education system in what now probably is a country with 3 million people due to mass immigration towards Western countries. This is the structure of the education system, but this is to say that basically any change from top-down change is almost impossible. And there were several attempts to initiate educational reform. 700 people were involved in reform, and almost nothing has been done. And if you look at policy documents, it's common core, standard, curricula, everything is perfect, progressive, modern, but on the ground, nothing happens. And this is also the building, this is a segregated school. Bosnia has 54 segregated schools where people of, children of Bosniak and Croat ethnicity are go to school either in separate buildings or in different shifts. Yeah, and I didn't mention that the conflict in Bosnia was triangular, Bosniak Muslim, Bosniak and Serbs, but also Bosniaks and Croats. Okay, coming back to language issues. As I said, there are 3 official languages in Bosnia at the level of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And basically, linguistically, this is one system that was previously called Serbo-Croatian or Croato-Serbian. This was the title used in education. So this language, which now bears ethnic names, so each ethnicity call it a different name, is also spoken in Serbia, in neighboring Serbia, Croatia, and Montenegro, where it has a separate name. Historically, if we look at varieties of these languages, 2 principal varieties were recognized. Eastern variety, like the Serbian, and Western variety, Croatian. Bosnia and Herzegovina and Montenegro were something in between, many isoglosses were cutting across the territory, but they had some kind of, we do have some specificities compared to Eastern and Western variant as well. But if we look into Bosnian, Serbian, and Croatian, so we can ask ourselves, are there any differences really? Or is it just kind of something that was imposed on speakers? Okay, there are regular dialectal micro-variation that was in place before the standard language is introduced, and that's normal. But of course, what was done after the war, a sort of re-standardization with the political agenda. And the political agenda was clear, to separate these people. But, everybody has different idea. For Serbs, they tried to reach this linguistic culture, also political unity with Serbians. So there is some sort of dialectal leveling with the variety which is spoken in Serbia. For Croatian, they wanted to really distinguish themselves from the 2 other ethnicities. So they adopted the language variety from Croatia, and they live in some sort of diglossia. For official purposes, they have this variety that is spoken in Croatia, and for informal purposes, they speak the same language as anyone else. And for Bosniaks, they're somehow in between. On one hand, they claim uniqueness, and they do use a lot of like Turkish and Arabic words. And on the other hand, they don't have another country. They don't have Serbia and Croatia. They have only Bosnia, and they kind of are advocates of this idea of multi-ethnic country, which is why they accept also other two varieties. And there is also, to say something that I noticed, that there were some differences between three ethnicities in the lexical stock and lexicon due to different religious practices. For example, a Muslim person from Bosnia would use buyurun for like have a nice appetite, and I would use a Slavic word. Or for like funeral, they would use like Turkish or Arabic word, I would use a Slavic word. But this is literally because of different religious practices. And no wonder that there are really a lot of names going on for the language. And it's difficult to navigate in this map of different names because each name is either a political statement or it's used to accommodate. For example, you will have Serbian or you will have Serbo-Croatian older generations that they do not accept divisions. Then you will have Bosnian, you will have BCS, those people who say, okay, it's the same language. You will have naš, our language, when you have people of different ethnicities sit together and talk about language. Local banks use that on ATMs because, you know, they want everybody to spend their money. Mother tongue, etc. Okay, this is probably, I don't know if you have seen this. This is a pack of cigarettes. 3 language statement, smoking kills. I don't know, Bosnian, Croatian, I don't know. And this is supposedly Serbian because Serbo-Croatian use both scripts, but somehow in this really tense ethnic divisions, in the it came to be that Cyrillic is mostly associated with Serbians for some reason. So this is ridiculous, but it's normal back home. Okay, so where we were before and where we are now, we came from like language tolerance during Yugoslavia times. Everything was tolerated. Every, I don't know, use of different words, use of different constructions, etc. It was embraced. It was seen as something that is enriching in Bosnia. We kind of from that kind of state of mind after the war. We became extremely intolerant in post-war times. We do not accept something that comes from speakers that are different, including alphabet. Another thing that is kind of typically Bosnian invention, I think, you know, language as a basic human right was something that was conceived of in relation to threatened languages and language minorities that were persecuted during the Second World War. We have this issue back home now, even though people speak the majority language. And they kind of, okay, it's a, you know, basic human right to call my language the way I want. And of course, the language as identity marker, as an ethnic identity marker, prevails over language as a communication tool. And this is what speakers kind of, the idea speakers have about language. No need to say that there is kind of low linguistic literacy, whereby I mean that most people think that, you know, knowing language is no prescriptive rules, correct grammar. And in a situation where nobody knows what standard is, you can imagine that there is a proliferation of self-proclaimed authorities, normative grammars, orthography manuals, for those who are in power, who sit in academies. And language academies, which is typically European invention, they have a lot of power. They have an exaggerated role in language policy issues, language questions, and everything. So correcting the way other people talk is quite pervasive. And there is also a lot of language purism, not only towards words of foreign origin, but like, you know, Croatian would kind of remove words they deem Serbian, and Serbians would like remove words that they think they're of Turkish origin. And there is a lot of chaos in that because it's so arbitrary. But the good thing is that we have kept and we do keep very extreme positive attitudes towards foreign language learning, both like in terms of institutions, because in our school system we learn 2 languages. English is obligatory since the age of 7, and then another language. So most time people talk at least 2 or 3 languages, which is good, and which is not the case in the United States. So, yeah, we can talk about that. I found a lot of parallels, especially in reference to Afro-American varieties and the way they, think about their identity and stuff like that. Okay, this is, for example, a textbook, first language textbook before the war. You would have like Cyrillic, Serbo-Croatian, Latin, Croato-Serbian, and then the language. It was very kind of careful plan in tolerance. And this is like the Bosnian script. Bosnian Cyrillic, in medieval ages, Bosnia has its own state and its own alphabet. So everything was there. Everybody was kind of satisfied. Okay, so this is one of the linguistic campaigns that was conceived in 2015, I think. This is really ridiculous because these are all those normative manuals. I mean, we have a phoneme-based orthography, and this is our orthography manual. It's like this thick. So you can imagine, I mean, and of course they kind of, because of the fact that people are not aware of what language discrimination is, a lot of famous people, pop singers, this is a famous basketball player in the US, NBA, Bogdan Bogdanovic, this is Monica Bellucci. I mean, they managed to hook these people to kind of promote prescriptivism. They have power. So this was the campaign. It's called Let's Preserve Serbian Language. Preserve Serbian language spoken by 20 million people. It's kind of very manipulating. And then, of course, they would tell a rule, like tell something from the regular language usage, and then correct with red. Okay. And then, you should buy this if you want to find out more. Okay, of course, apart from us linguists, who kind of had this immediate reaction to these things, there's some, like in popular culture, a lot of defiance to authority. This is a very popular Facebook page called Let's Preserve Serbian Language, but intentionally orthography rules are violated, and it's a lot of fun and play a lot with these nationalistic stereotypes. So, I think people are not as stupid as we might think. Okay, going back to first language in school system. So you may think about what happens with first language in education. This thing, which is kind of completely not like crazy. First language is considered part of this national group of school subject alongside history, religion, and geography, which means that Bosniaks, Serbs, and Croats learn different language, different history, different religion, and different geography. It's kind of ideology as it's like in its light. But in Republika Srpska entity, however, you find only Serbian language and literature, only exceptionally Croatian in Catholic schools. In Federation of Bosnia, you find Bosnian and Croatian, depending on the ethnicity, but you also find a subject called BCS, Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian. Recall that only Bosniaks kind of accept this idea of multi-ethnic Bosnia. And finally, we have Brčko district, which is unique. It is the only place in Bosnia where you have separate subjects. Bosnian language, Serbian language, Croatian language. The situation is, I did like field work there. Children sit in school in all subjects, but they divide in like first language subject. So they go to, like Bosniaks go to Bosnian language, Serbians go to Serbian language, and Croats go to Croat. And all other classes, they sit together. Yeah, it's funny, but it's kind of crazy. Okay, so what about linguistics? So we don't have a standalone course in linguistics. We do have something that, like elective classes, section. It's from the old system, socialist system. So it is only a place where it can be introduced as a separate subject, but not like as a normal, regular subject in schools. When it comes to linguistics and first language, what most people think linguistics is about teaching grammar. But teaching grammar in a Latin-style grammar, as a taxonomy of rules, memorizing, is something that is outside of speakers. And there's a lot of grammar in our school. All parts of grammar are covered. Phonetics and phonology, derivational morphology, inflectional morphology, cases, we do have cases, and then syntax. And of course, there is this preponderance of standard language, a very elitist approach to language. So everything that comes from speakers, not only their dialect, but also their slang, their like regular speech, is banned, stigmatized, and it's not explored at all in schools. There is a strong emphasis on orthography, which is ridiculous, especially attached, unattached writing of clitics. We do have a lot of clitics, negation, question clitics, etc. Small capital letters, which is completely politically relevant, but you know, in our schools it's so important. Hyphens as well. And for me as a linguist, like the fact that error is not explored as a source of learning, but seen as a deficit, is something really bad, because all linguistic analysis is done on structures that are not possible. This is how we understand how grammar works, and this is not explored at all in our schools. Okay, in my project, I did like first field work in 3 schools in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I interviewed students and teachers. In the second phase, which is ending now, I collected data in the US, and in the third phase, I will be implementing results of this project in Bosnia. So I relied on the research from education, like qualitative research, focus groups, questionnaires, in-depth interviews, observations, ethnography, a little bit of ethnography, document and textbook analysis. I did my research in 3 public high schools with 3 different settings. In the first setting, there were like 3 separate school subjects for 3 different ethnicities. In the second settings, high school students of Serbian ethnicity were exposed to Croatian language and literature. And in the third setting, Serbs were attending Serbian language and literature. As for the questions, more or less, I will try to summarize those. I was like asking them questions about their preferential learning and cognitive styles, like how do you study, what kind of materials, pair or individual work, what kind of materials do you like, how would you organize a class, do you look for the answers on the internet, what type of teaching do you appreciate most. They had also to assess quality of the existing teaching materials. And also I was like asking questions about their understanding of language, mostly prescriptivist or descriptivist approach, and language and identity. So I would ask something like, do you think you know well enough your language? Is there something that knows it better? How would you describe the language to a foreigner? Who speaks your language? Where? Would you compare your language with the language of other 2 groups? What do you think they have in common? And I also ask about language in schools. Do you think they can be taught together? How? Would you like to know more about the language of the other ethnic group and stuff? Also, I questioned them about variation by asking them, is there any difference in the way you speak in your L1 classes, first language classes, and in other subjects? Of course, understanding and knowledge of the Bosnia and Herzegovina socio-linguistic situation, and readiness to learn about other 2 languages. As for the teachers, I was like, I mostly did in-depth interviews, asking them about materials, about teacher training, pre-service teacher training, in-service professional development, about how do they, and if they tackle the issue of variation, grammar, and language change. What are their favorite teaching methods to assess them, etc. Like especially focusing on project inquiry-based learning, use of corpora, digital sources, and different methods we use in linguistics as well. And also about socio-linguistic situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and to discuss like what are the major obstacles to reform of first language teaching. I repeat, there is a lot of material, so I had to kind of summarize some most prevailing patterns. As expected, there is a strong positive attitude towards foreign languages, and students think they should be learned from the very early age, even before the school. And as expected, very negative attitudes towards first language grammar teaching. And they would say, oh, it's too many rules, I don't understand, it's too difficult. I would like to have more examples. There's so many definitions which I cannot connect with the real language use. They would say, oh, it's a beautiful language, but it's so difficult to learn. This kind of difficulty, and they're native speakers. But they do prefer some parts of others. For example, sound change is something that everybody likes, and when I ask why, they say, okay, I can anchor it in real language use, but I hate cases. I don't understand cases. And I think like children acquire cases at the age of 5. And then, of course, why do we need the syntax of the complex sentence? I don't need that. Okay. And they do like change. They do like change and variation. I would like to see how the words change over time, what happens with the language in different contexts. They're non-readers, and this is the answers I got from teachers here as well. Students don't read textbooks. So forget about textbooks when preparing materials for high schools. They do want more active roles, so everything that is project-based, and I gave them examples. Would you like to do what I do now? Would you like to do this or that? Inquiry-based learning, they like to play with language games. They want games. More, of course, multimedia materials, but not all of them. And they hate the existing materials and teaching methods. They say unclear, boring, too theoretical. Teachers are depressed and depressive, yeah. And they use the internet to check spelling, or sometimes when they're not sure, they control like some exercises, explanations, and I ask them, how do you know if that's correct? Oh, if I understand it, it's correct. If I don't, it's not. It's a good answer, whatever. And which was like interesting that students, they know languages and they probably ask themselves how languages work, and they would like to have more comparison with other languages in first language classes. And of course, unfortunately, most of them say there is someone who knows language better than them, teacher or people who know the history of language, whatever it means, and they have very negative attitudes towards their own language. They say, oh, we have poor vocabulary, we use a lot of abbreviations, or these all are from English, as is easy. They use RIP for rest in peace. Or they say, oh my god, like, because you don't, oh my god, beautiful, you know them. Okay, a lot of swear words, but yeah, this is what young people do. Okay, probably the most interesting question was the one related to language and identity, and I'm working actually on 2 papers because it's so interesting. So in a 3-language setting, I was expecting that I would find more tolerant attitude towards other languages. This is not the case. So it seems that in a setting where 3 groups live together, they want to kind of keep their identity separated from the others. And language is probably the easiest way to do so. It is a sensitive issue, very sensitive issue. I realize that it provokes discomfort in them, probably because they never talked about it, never sat in a place where they could discuss those things with each other. They use a lot of avoidance strategies in presence of the other ethnicities. Where is the language spoken? In the Balkans. That was the answer. I said, oh, that's quite like, yeah. And, you know, they are very well aware of differences. And they kind of highlight words, different words, accent. Probably there are some isoglosses. Script, Latin, Cyrillic. Some orthographic conventions in the standard that were reintroduced after the war, obviously. History, but not history like change, language change, but where my language comes from, which is, you know, it's nothing, it's not linguistics either. Some say, okay, it is the same language. They say it's similar, but sometimes they say it is the same language, but still they're not ready to learn it as one subject. Say it shouldn't be coalesced into one subject. The reason is that there are perceived differences, but also for some languages should be learned to promote patriotic feelings. But however, the good thing is that most students think that it's very positive to learn about other varieties, and let's say it's useful for the future. I want to know more about the other students and their language and their history, and I found it very positive. However, ethnic definition of the language prevails. But of course, there are different opinions when they need to provide answers as with respect to other 2 languages. And there is kind of like, either I wouldn't mention them, oh, I would say they're similar, almost the same. Oh, it's a very difficult question. Nobody ever asked me this. And as expected, Bosnian children show more readiness to have one curriculum and to host other 2 languages, like have an alternate kind of Serbian and then Bosnian and Croatian, Serbian, Bosnian, and Croat. And strange enough, when I ask them, do you know of any other languages which is in a similar situation, they all mention German and English. But I think this is inaccurate. And, you know, in the future, I probably should kind of introduce this and then discuss it. It's more like accurate to consider Scandinavia, right? Okay, strange enough, like, 2nd and 3rd setting, Serbian students learning Croatian and Serbian students learning Serbian seem to be more tolerant. Maybe because their identity is not threatened. They require, this issue is not studied in schools, but they say we want to know more. We want to be able to talk about that. But also these students are older. As they grow older, they defy prescriptivism, they defy authority, and they require more knowledge in schools. Also heard some interesting comparison with South and North Korea. This was interesting. And this was like probably the most tolerant group. Serbian students learning Croatian, they consider it to be able to know 2 standards to be an asset. And they're very tolerant towards other variants and varieties only by being exposed to them. But then of course there is a question, those who go to schools where Croatian is taught, aren't they already tolerant enough? You know? Okay. Teachers are actually very accurate in diagnosing problems. They are pretty aware of the situation, and they do say that teachers have very low competencies in terms of linguistics. They do think that there is a lack of professional development, especially when it comes to sociolinguistics, other linguistic analysis courses, pedagogical methods that are based more on inquiry and research, use of technology in classroom. They want to know more about language disorders. They think they don't know enough. And they also think they don't have enough autonomy, because not everywhere, but in some settings they cannot even choose textbooks. It's imposed on them. But they're all unanimously reluctant to address the sociolinguistic situation. It's touchy. It's a sensitive issue. They're afraid of the reactions. But students do pose questions. Students do ask for information. Those who are willing to say something like more about it, they normally say, okay, it's the same language, but it's a political question, and then that's it. The most important thing, because it's not about language, it's about attitudes. They don't address at all the question of conflicting ideologies. And one teacher, Bosnian, told me, I shouldn't be talking about that. That's the issue that should be addressed in, we have a subject called Democracy and Human Rights, in Democracy and Human Rights subject. That's very interesting, actually. They think the materials are outdated, textbooks are old, they're inaccessible, confusing, they need to go to find some materials on their own, and it requires a lot of preparation, and they don't have good training for that. And this is correct. They locate obstacles within institutions, or for younger teachers, they think it's age-related. They say, because we live in patriarchal culture where, if you're an older teacher, younger teachers should follow older teachers and not kind of be too propositive in their teaching. As for the document analysis, I told you, they're very well done, and there's a lot of room for introducing linguistics, linguistically informed curricula. If you look at Common Core standards for all 3 languages, the definition of standard language says the student understands, it's actually based on learning outcomes, the student understands that standard language rules are a matter of agreement, they can change over time and can be contested. You can do everything with this. Explain everything. Or variation, the student intentionally deviates from standard language use in order to convey certain effects of meanings in proper writing. You can teach linguistics perfectly. Curricula are amazingly well written. They're linguistically informed. They contain sociolinguistics. But Bosnia and Herzegovina sociolinguistic situation is addressed only where all 3 languages are taught. The drawback is that there is strong emphasis on the history of language and too many necessary details. So this could be like rewritten a little bit better, but they're still quite good. Okay. As for the second phase, which I'm in now, I did all of this stuff. I interviewed teachers and other people. I sit in Kristen's class. I was teaching and talking to my amazing students. I read a lot of documents, and I've been reading like every day a lot. There's some reflections. I won't go into too much detail. We can talk about it in the discussion section. What I found really important, but it's also like should be done more, is this linguist-teacher collaboration. Teachers have literature. We have like a book called What Teachers Need to Know About Language that grew out of collaboration with teachers, but I'm not sure that teachers are actually aware of that and that they use it. Teachers prefer publications written by teachers. They kind of feel intimidated by researchers for some reason. They don't have enough knowledge of linguistics. They have very little knowledge of foreign languages and dialectal variation. This is something that Galway and Dreiser talk about. And of course, prescriptivism and negative attitudes are still widespread, especially towards speakers of, for example, African American varieties, but also other minority languages. And they do require that there are more accessible articles in the media. That real linguists should be more kind of like present in the popular media. Okay, as if I were to compare the two contexts, and I would assume that you're familiar with the US, there are some things that are common to both contexts, like standard language ideology, the idea that there is correct and incorrect language in both. And as a result, prescriptivism, language prejudice, linguistic discrimination, yes, in both, to a different extent, to different groups of people in a different way, but yes, there is. Language is a strong marker of identity, yes, but also for African American variety, yes. And I read a lot of literature written by people who teach English to African American population, and it's always the case that they mention that it's a very sensitive issue, especially if you're white. And I feel that's kind of, there is a comparison, you know, if I teach language, I'm Serbian and I teach about language to somebody who is Bosnian or Croatian, I can get the same feeling probably. I could feel uncomfortable. Linguistics courses is cool, Bosnia no, US yes, but how many? Very few, very, very few. I was able to count some 12 people, more or less, in all of US. We're talking about a country, like really big country with a great research in linguistics. Linguistically informed curricula, yes, I mean for linguistics. For English language arts, so-so. Linguistics and education, linguistics in and for education, yes, thanks to also Western Washington efforts. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, not at all. Nothing exists, so this is the first project of its kind. Teaching materials, a lot in the US, very good materials that can be found online. In Bosnia, not at all. Linguists don't care about it. We have good linguistics, but they think it's just kind of, you know, they do their stuff, they research, they don't care about schools. Linguist-teacher collaboration, we don't have such thing, and in the US there are some. As for foreign languages, in the US, so-so, and we do have a long and good tradition of learning other languages. These are like three big questions I've been thinking about. First of all, I need to intensify empirical research. I studied only 3 schools, but Bosnia is very complex. There were a lot of micro-conflicts and a lot of situations, so I need to find out more. I need to think about how to overcome resistance. I'm a linguist, I'm a researcher. Like schools, teachers, and people from the Ministry of Education don't like us for some reason, and I don't understand how to approach them. We're a threat for their ideology. And of course, the big question is how to reverse this existing paradigm in education where teachers and students are passive recipients of knowledge and turn them into a critical subject who does research on language, who examines ideologies, who is kind of like constantly questioning what's happening in language. My super busy agenda. So I need to work, and I need to work on the materials. Like based on the materials, I kind of was able to see here what works in the classroom, what doesn't work, but also include other linguists and teachers as well. I need to find a way to collaborate more with teachers, or at least create a platform where we could share knowledge and where teachers could kind of find materials and answers to some of their questions, because they're good actually, they're not as bad as we think. Networking, I need to kind of, promote linguistics more and advocate more for linguistics for education within linguistics scientific community. And this should be a global effort, not only like Bosnia and United States, but everywhere in the world. What about pedagogical models? Obviously, it's not like enough to teach only linguistics. We should also develop those models who tackle explicitly ideologies about language and in language. Grassroots activities of promotional linguistics, most people in the world don't know about what linguistics is. People don't know what linguistics is about anywhere in the world. They think we are people who speak languages or tell people what is correct or incorrect language. This is thing that I would like to write more about in the media. I want to raise awareness about language discrimination. And people don't recognize language discrimination. You saw that pop singers and basketball players participated eagerly in what is an obvious case of language discrimination. So people don't know that when you correct other people or say that their language is wrong, that is discrimination. And of course, what we've been doing all the time is to promote linguistic diversity, because without linguistic diversity, there would be no linguistics. And as for pedagogical models, which I've started thinking a lot about that, my question is, how should I approach a classroom in which students have conflicting ideas about language? That's a big question. Of course, we need to work a lot, think about how to work on language attitudes and how to critically assess existing beliefs about language, especially if it's part of their core identity. How to tackle prescriptivist ideology, I have some good examples. I sit in Kristen class and I have good materials and I like the way they do it here, and I think it's a very good example for everybody. And finally, one model which I found really good is critical language pedagogy. And it says it's an instructional approach that guides students to critical examination of the ideologies surrounding language and dialects, the power of relation such ideologies uphold, and ways to change these ideologies. So it's not only about teaching, it's also about initiating this change. It's wrong, it's about power structures, it's not about language, and this is probably should be a final result of everything I've done so far, and that's it. I would like to thank these people, because without them, I wouldn't be doing this. Thank you. So we have, 10 minutes for discussion.
I have so many questions. Can you just talk a little bit more about the situation for professional linguists in the, I don't even know how to describe your area.
Well, you know that I was threatened and attacked during my research.
Right.
Yeah, and I got because everything that you do as a linguist, they think that you kind of want to destroy their language, their identity, or you want to establish Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia is now the biggest enemy. So it's very complex. And I did research through the ministry, official, and I don't think that was not a good way. Probably more ethnography, more observation, more because it's a very sensitive issue. It's a political issue. And I was they almost fired me from where I work, because there's Serbs, there's a strong ideology, Serbians, they don't recognize Bosnian. It's a threat for them, for their identity.
So if you get a PhD in linguistics and you're from Serbia or Croatia or one of those places, then where do you go work?
We have only 2 departments. We have in Zagreb and Belgrade, we have departments of linguistics. But linguists normally work in language and literature departments. I work in Italian language and literature, and I'm quite safe. But I don't think they would ever let me in Serbian language and literature, because I'm not a nationalist. I don't. This is it's the system we live in. They have power.
So to create connections between professional linguists in your countries with teachers would be very difficult, because you don't really have a cohort.
Yes, but I'm already in some groups. I kind of coordinate linguistic seminars. I promote a lot of linguistic research. We have a regional linguistic data initiative, an amazing group of linguists, regional linguists. But this is for reform for university studies. The problem is with schools. They don't let us in. There is no way. I don't know what's schools are the ultimate tower of ideologies.
And we encountered that here as well. Just no response from administrators or high school that you wrote to.
Yeah, teachers here, I didn't get any response. So teachers are, I don't know, why is that?
And I don't think that's necessarily ideological, just overwhelmed or
yeah, that could be the case.
Here.
Yeah. I'm curious about the language teachers in Bosnia or Herzegovina throughout the region. I don't know how much linguistics is part of a regular curriculum for someone who's going to be a language teacher. Because I don't, but I'm wondering is there any sense that in the colleges of education for people who want to become language teachers that there is an expectation of some linguistics?
They do have linguistics. They have intro to linguistics. They have a lot of dialectology. They have, but I don't think it's just they have to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
So they don't necessarily pass that.
I think that they do pass, some teachers are probably better than others and they do pass the message that this is wrong, but how can I know that? I mean, I was not observing their classes and they probably wouldn't let me. But we have there are a lot of initiatives. There was in 2017, there was this huge declaration on common language signed by Peter Trudgill and Noam Chomsky that, okay, it's okay to call language whatever name, but you shouldn't be discriminating, you shouldn't be exaggerating these differences and stuff. But nothing happened. Nothing happened. There is no political will to change the state of affairs. So I think that some grassroots activities, some bottom-up change, and it's a process, like here as well. I mean, here, if you ask, we're all white here, but I'm pretty sure if you take a black person and ask how was it like during the school, it would be a completely different answer from the perspective of somebody who was exposed to discrimination. Based on language or whatever.
Yeah, it's like looking at the people who are trying to propose translanguaging as something that they want to bring into the educational linguistics, and they're facing pushback from scholars in educational linguistics who are saying no.
Yeah, that's the same. I don't know how to proceed. I mean, if you have any ideas, experience, because it's not this situation is not relaxing the ethnic tension. It's just things are not good, and people have those boundaries in their head because we're physically there are no boundaries. We can go wherever, but this is something that's obviously been created as part of ideology, not as something real.
You had on your last slide materials for developing materials to help talk about the ideologies. Right, the second row there. I mean, the critical, this was, sort of in the godly and reason ideas,
they
but
do
these
have,
are thinking of these that would work regardless of your linguistic situation.
But that research of theirs is flawed because it's only white teachers.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of problems. I don't think it can be taken as an example fully. But of course, I can one thing that Anne proposed is to try to tackle these things based on some other languages, and then kind of, what do you think about?
Or students, so I was thinking of Wolfram's model of, students' own dialects, so don't even get into what do you think about everybody else, just what about you?
Yes.
And I think that's a really good first step, and students love doing that.
Yes.
And just stay away from the scary ideological stuff at first until.
But they're so smart, but even their aware variation, they're so kind of, and the system kind of screws them completely.
I mean, I'm thinking about Django Paris' work. Django Paris, educational linguist
Okay.
in California.
Okay, I will check that. I was not in this field at all before, so I'm new to this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm thinking he may have some stuff.
I can check that. But it would be nice to try something and see what happens.
And he and a couple other people are coming out, being high school teachers and then coming back and getting degrees in linguistics.
Okay, the opposite.
So they're doing that whole process because they felt this need to do that.
Yeah. But it's definitely interesting because you can really study. And Bosnia, the paradox of granularity of language. We don't know what language dialect, where the line between we don't know that. It's known from philosophy of language. But here you see how this kind of you can show this paradox in Bosnia. It's kind of completely So it's interesting to study these things as well. I think a little bit hard.
A little bit hard. I mean, I guess I'm wondering about the discomfort. So there are teachers that we work with are reluctant sometimes to bring these things up with, oh, my kids, say middle schoolers, they're too young to talk about discrimination, power, racial differences. And I push back on that. But in your case, though, some of these teachers, there's bigger fears of having people
losing
come
a
out,
job.
losing your job.
Yeah, I don't know what.
You.
It's huge. So I'm thinking about working in some NGO civil sector first, and then kind of see how it works. And also, like what I read in Gala and Reaser's book, like White Talk, how they're reluctant to address, power relations with White Talk. I mean, a lot of stuff I discovered here I was not aware of. Thank you, Fulbright, and thank you, Western. And I'm really eager to find out more about that, because actually it's similar. It's the same thing in a different context with different historical circumstances, but there is this kind of no reconciliation process. We just live separate worlds, basically. And language is a group cohesion marker in Black community. It seems to be like very similar to what I saw in Brčko district, for example. I don't want to give up on my language and my identity. It's mine.
Yeah.
It's there. Yeah. So I don't know what it would be like if a white person would come to and teach African American English. I mean, would that be a problem? Yes. I don't want you to use my language. You're kind of like, Bosniaks, there was a war. People were, I can come to a classroom and have students, for example, whole family could have been killed in the war. Or people, could have been in detention camps and concentration camps. And, how is it ethically okay that I tell them that they give up on their identities? It's difficult.
But they don't need to. I mean, have you read Mary book? We talked about this. Her book on white kids.
Yeah, I didn't read that.
White kids in a predominantly African American school, and how those white kids negotiate their whiteness and their identity, which isn't the racial issue is not the point. The point is that everybody has some sort of linguistic identity in capital. And if you can figure out what those are for those kids so that they can talk about themselves in their own social system without, getting into those more touchy.
Okay. So more affirmative, right?
Yeah, like just that you have a linguistic identity. I mean, that is the first step for kids. They don't even know that they do.
Yeah.
And then when they start to understand that, then they can look at I use this form and they use this form, or like the nerds and the jocks, and start smaller. Before
Smaller.
you get
I will definitely look into that book, and all the materials you have in mind. I'm really happy to learn more about that, because back home we don't talk about this. It's a taboo. I mean, for me personally, I went back to Bosnia. I moved back to Bosnia 20 years after the war. In 20 years, I wasn't able to talk about the war. I couldn't. It was such a trauma for me that I simply couldn't. And people are really kind of. This is, but we must. We have to, because if we don't. It's not the way it's our responsibility as linguists and researchers to help people kind of live together and understand each other. I think that's something we should do. That's why I'm more kind of interested in doing something.
Well, when you were on the topic of African Americans and AAVE, I kind of have a different experience, because I was mostly in predominantly white institutions too, so my kind of identity towards AAVE is kind of not really present, because I didn't really grow up speaking it.
You see.
So I was just kind of wondering, is there a similar phenomenon at all, in the Balkans? Is there someone from a different ethnic group who maybe grew up in dominant? Yeah.
It's so complex. I mean, this is a very simplification. There are a lot of people like me. We completely defy ethnic identity. A lot of people do that. We don't want to identify because we're tired of this. There are people who are Serbians that grew were in Sarajevo, was the city that was sieged for 1,500 days, the longest siege in the modern history. Serbs that were there living with Bosnians, they feel more like Bosniak-like. It's all about circumstances. And, you know, there's interesting, when I was interviewing children, a lot of different answers. Like one kid was kind of asked, okay, would you like to learn, like to have other languages in your subject? He said, he was so angry. He said, no, I mean, if they already divided us, we shouldn't be learning about others. He was kind of like, you know, so many different views, but it's good to talk to them, to ask them, to see what they think, because they do have an opinion. They are kind of like, they feel discomfort, but when everybody has an opinion, you know, that's kind of those issues that, which means they think about it.
And teenagers will talk about that.
Yeah, they're amazing. They're so smart. We should learn from them. They're really smart. And we're so stupid. I mean, people back home like older people. But they are, yeah, and it's I don't know what is the like, because, you know, the problem back home is I have problems with linguists as well. They sit in their offices, they write their papers, they make their declarations, etc., without knowing what's going on in the community. And I said, you know, and it's not how we should, if language is a strong marker of identity, I think we have to accept that. Though it's the same language, we need to accept that. We cannot tell them it's the same language. They were killing each other like for 3 years. It's not okay, it's not adequately correct.